Our next impacted witness is Mr. Daryl Atkinson. Attorney Daryl Atkinson is the co-founder and co-director of Forward Justice. Forward Justice is a nonpartisan law, policy, and strategy center dedicated to advancing racial, social, and economic justice. Daryl is a person who was formerly incarcerated and is intimately familiar with the harmful and harsh consequences of criminal justice involvement. He is one of the founders of the Second Chance Alliance and served as the first Second Chance Fellow for the U.S. Department of Justice Attorney General Loretta Lynch. After we hear from Mr. Daryl Atkinson, we will have questions given by Attorney Eddie Thomas, and then after that, we'll have affirmation by Ms. Jency Baker. I turn it over to you, Daryl.
Can folks hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
I apologize in advance for the format that I'm meeting you all in this evening. I'm juggling multiple balls. I lead a nonprofit organization, and we had a board meeting today, and we are having a closing dinner. So I'm interrupting that to be with you all, and I thought it was important enough to do that. I'm a person formerly incarcerated. I was imprisoned in the mid-90s, convicted of a first-time nonviolent drug crime in 1996 and given a 10-year sentence. 1996, to contextualize, is 2 years after the passage of the 94 crime bill, which had embedded within it the collateral consequence of not being able to have any Pell Grant assistance for any post-secondary education. So I went into prison with a high school diploma. I came out with a high school diploma. Fortunate enough for me, I had a loving family that could provide me food, clothing, and shelter. And I didn't have those immediate Maslow'ian pressures kind of pressing down upon me. And I was able to think, work a plan, go back to school. Went back and got my associate's degree, bachelor's degree, law degree. I'm licensed to practice law in Minnesota and North Carolina. Have been practicing in North Carolina since 2007, have never had a client that did not have a criminal record. I exclusively advocate for the civil and human rights of people who've been entangled in the criminal legal system. My work has, taken me to the Justice Department, the White House, and despite all of those ticks on the resume all throughout that time, and even to this day, I'm disenfranchised in the state of Alabama because I was convicted of a crime that they designated as a crime of moral turpitude. In addition to serving my prison sentence, I've paid off over $50,000 in legal financial obligations to the state of Alabama over a 20-year period. So I paid with my body, I paid with my resources, and my question to this committee and to this country is, when do we stop paying? When do we ever stop paying? Right, for unnecessary incarceration? And I call it unnecessary incarceration because I could have had a different type of intervention. I didn't have to be sentenced to a cage, but I was sentenced to a cage. And we see some of these different types of interventions in the way that we're responding to the opioid epidemic. We're responding in a completely different way to that population who has problematic substance use disorder, both to the users, the dealers, to the kids, to everybody in between. And I can't help but wonder, is it because of the complexion for the connection? Is it because white folks are now being impacted by this substance use disorder and not black people? Because when it was black people, we called them crack babies. When it was black people, we demonized everybody in the community who that particular ailment touched. But now we have naloxone access where the police officers have opiate antagonist drugs. We had nothing like that for the crack epidemic. Crack epidemic, police officers wasn't doing nothing but busting you upside the head, right? But now we reverse opioid epidemics, and that's a good thing. Now we have 911 Good Sam laws that shield people from prosecution if someone overdoses and everybody's sitting around getting high. But rather than sending folks to jail, we want to facilitate people calling EMS and the police so we can save lives. We did none of that with the crack epidemic, and we need to reckon with that. We need to reckon with why? we didn't do it, and we need to reckon with how we're going to make it right. All of the damage that we did to individuals and communities across this country. So I hope that's what some of this hearing is about. Not just the pomp and circumstances of hearing fuzzy stories, but now what are we going to do with this information to make this right? Because we've done tremendous damage to communities and to people across this state and across this country. So for me, the 40 months in a cage was a blip on the radar screen of life. It was everything that came after: the denial of TANF and public benefits, the denial of Section 8 housing and public housing, the denial of federal student loans and Pell Grants, the denial of employment and occupational licenses, the denial. So when you make the right thing real hard to do, you make the wrong thing real easy to do for people. And it makes it almost wonder, is this the purpose? Is this the intended purpose, to keep people trapped in this new Jim Crow? So, I'll pause there, and I hope the commission is taking this testimony and developing some actionable items that we can do right now to help people and change their lives and repair all the damage that's been done. I
Daryl,
don't
my
know if
brother.
I'm supposed to say nothing else.
No, Daryl, my brother. That was great. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for the passion that we hear in your voice. I have just a few questions for you. I would like to know if you believe that race played a role in your arrest and prosecution, and if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. Mandatory minimums, the idea that we were going to punish crack cocaine harsher than we punish powder cocaine, when we know that usage rates between crack and powder are no different between racial demographic groups. We know that sale rates, people buy drugs from their social network, meaning that if you want to go on the south side of Durham, it's a social network that folks get their drugs from in that social network. But also, if you go to Duke's campus, it's a social network that people getting their drugs from there as well. And the usage rates are essentially the same. It's where we choose to enforce, and where we have chosen to enforce, particularly around substance abuse, have been on the backs of Black and brown people. Even right now, the highest prosecuted felony in this state is drugs, and is disproportionately impacting Black and brown people. So absolutely, race, whether it was conscious or unconscious, was a seminal factor in my prosecution.
As co-director of Forward Justice, how do you use your role to fight for the accused in the post-arrest or pre-conviction phase of a criminal case?
Well, I can talk about some of our most recent litigation, where in 2019, we sued the state of North Carolina over its policy around disenfranchising people who are living in our communities who are under felony supervision. We sued that it was unconstitutional under various provisions of the North Carolina Constitution. I was lead counsel on this case, lead counsel now, and it's because that I was disenfranchised myself why I had so much motivation to work on that case. Last September 2020, a 3-judge panel ruled that North Carolina's policy of extending people's probation because of their inability to pay legal financial obligations violated 2 provisions of the North Carolina Constitution, and they enjoined the State Board of Elections from doing that. So people who had financial penalties, who couldn't get off probation because they did not have money. Money was their only barrier to them getting an unconditional discharge to get off probation or post-release supervision. The North Carolina court said that that is unconstitutional. This year, fast forward, we went to trial on our intentional race discrimination claims that North Carolina's disenfranchisement statute was enacted with intentional racial discrimination. North Carolina did not have felony disenfranchisement where it applied to all felonies until 1877. On the heels of radical Reconstruction, to neuter the black political power after radical Reconstruction in the wake of the 15th Amendment. That was the original intent. And it's having that a desired effect today. 21% of the voting age population is black. 42% of the people who are disenfranchised are black. African American men, 9% of the voting age population. They're 36% of the people who are disenfranchised. This law is having the intended impact that it was designed to have. And we also know that there's no good reason that the government put forth for having it. So absolutely, we're advocating for the rights of the formerly incarcerated people with criminal convictions in the voting arena, as well as other domains of life.